What if I told you that this predator was once more than just an island legend? It was part of ancient Australia, sharing its world with giant monitor lizards, marsupial predators, and megafauna that no longer exists today. Then rising sea levels, a changing climate, and the Straits of Wallacea broke the world apart, dividing it into Flores, Timor, Komodo, and dozens of smaller islands. Some populations disappeared from the mainland, while others became trapped among dry forests, volcanic slopes, and narrow coastlines. Komodo was not the monitor lizard's birthplace, but its final refuge, a place where it had no competitors left, yet still had deer, wild boar, buffalo, scorching heat, and villages forced to live alongside the largest lizard on Earth. But the strangest part is that the locals can't simply drive these predators away or kill them. Komodo dragons are protected by law, which means the villagers have to live beside an animal that remains legally protected even when it's capable of killing them. When a predator's protected by law, people find themselves trapped. They can't simply shoot it, force it off the island, or introduce an even more dangerous animal to fight it. Their only option is to stop meeting force with force and instead look for an animal capable of making the dragon's life difficult in ways humans themselves are no longer allowed to. Meet the honey badger. Although you probably heard about it, this small African predator became famous not for its size, but for attacking venomous snakes, tearing apart beehives, digging prey out of the ground, and acting as though the difference in strength barely matters. In the wild, these two predators aren't supposed to ever run into each other. The Komodo dragon survives on only a handful of Indonesian islands, while the honey badger lives in a completely different part of the world, across Africa and southern Asia. So a confrontation between them could only happen if humans deliberately transported one predator into the territory of the other. One is used to surviving among predators stronger than itself, the other to living on an island where almost everything gets out of its way. And if 100 honey badgers suddenly appeared on Komodo, the question would no longer be which animal was stronger, but whose rules would begin to fall apart first. What's strange here isn't just the Komodo dragon itself, but also the place where it managed to become what it is. Because an island isn't simply a small piece of a continent that broke off and drifted out to sea. Islands actually make up almost 1/6 of all the land on Earth. Put them all together and you'd get a landmass roughly the size of North America. But every island plays by its own rules. It's harder to get there and harder to leave, and because of that isolation, island animals often change more rapidly. New species also tend to emerge faster because from evolution's point of view, an island is a separate, sealed-off lab. You can grow just about anything in there. But first, that anything has to reach the island. Walking isn't an option, there's no bridge, so new species arrive by air, by sea, or almost entirely by accident, carried by the wind, swept along the water, or riding on top of something that floats. That's why the first organisms to establish themselves on islands are usually the ones that are naturally good at spreading. Plants, birds, and all kinds of small, resilient creatures. Mammals are a different story. They do sometimes appear on oceanic islands, but every such case becomes a separate mystery for scientists to solve. By the way, one theory suggests that the ancestors of monkeys and apes may have reached Africa in exactly this way, floating there on natural rafts from what's now Asia. Then they evolved and spread out in every direction, eventually inventing the wheel, therapists, and YouTube. But that takes an extraordinary amount of luck, so colonizing a new island can take hundreds of years. Add another few thousand or even millions of years without contact with the outside world, and there you have it, a unique ecosystem. That's how some of the strangest and most distinctive species on Earth came to exist. Species found nowhere else in the world. Sometimes island life forced animals to become smaller. Other times it made them grow to enormous sizes. This is known as island gigantism. And this is where the Komodo dragon enters the scene. Islands tend to make evolution play by a different set of rules. Resources are scarcer, food chains are shorter, and there are often fewer competitors. The Nusa Tenggara Islands had no animals like tigers or lions, so Komodo dragons moved into the vacant role of apex predator. They felt great there. No competition, plenty of food, and all the freedom to hunt, keep growing, and take down some seriously large prey. And in ancient times, there was plenty of prey like that. These islands were once home to dwarf elephants called stegodons. So the Komodo dragon rose to the challenge and grew big enough to hunt them. The elephants are long gone, but the Komodo dragons are still here. For tourists, they're a symbol of the wilderness, a giant lizard you admire from a safe distance while being firmly warned not to get any closer. Beautiful, terrifying, unforgettable. But to the people who actually live on these islands, the Komodo dragon's about the worst neighbor imaginable. Just imagine a 10-foot carnivorous lizard crawling around your apartment building or wandering down your street while the government tells you to be careful because it's a protected species. And Komodo dragons aren't exactly shy about approaching people. They may even attack if they feel like it. Of course, when I say attack, I don't mean there's a massacre every day, but the numbers are still unsettling. According to official data from Komodo National Park, 24 attacks on humans were recorded over a 38-year period from 1974 to 2012. 5 of them were fatal. Local people are most often the ones at risk. Less commonly, the victims are careless tourists or park rangers. Children face the greatest danger simply because of their smaller size. There have been cases of Komodo dragons attacking children near villages during the dry season. And a Komodo dragon attack isn't just a bite from a very large lizard. Its jaws inflict deep, ragged wounds, and some victims have even lost limbs. And it gets worse. Komodo dragons have venom glands, which means you can go into shock. Your blood may stop clotting properly, and you may quickly lose consciousness while the dragon starts eating you. But the danger to humans is only one part of the problem. Komodo dragons regularly wander into settlements and attack goats, chickens, and other small livestock right in the middle of villages. And if only they would kill all the chickens and leave it at that. Komodo dragons also have an incredibly powerful sense of smell. They can detect freshly dug human graves and dig them up to eat the bodies. That's why local people have to cover graves with heavy concrete slabs. The problem is they can't simply deal with the animals by force. Komodo dragons are a protected species. On top of that, conservation regulations are reshaping life in the villages. For example, local people are no longer allowed to hunt deer because deer are the dragon's main source of prey. As wild food becomes scarcer, hungry dragons began venturing closer to human homes more often. So in that sense, the restrictions at least somewhat reasonable. Other rules make far less sense. Villagers used to rely on dogs as an early warning system to protect themselves from the reptiles, but conservation programs now ban dogs inside the parks, which means the risk of a Komodo dragon attack is significantly higher. And then there are all the additional rules surrounding ecotourism and environmental protection. They regularly interfere with plans to relocate or expand local communities. The result is a bizarre situation. People live alongside a large predator that can attack them, enter their villages, kill their livestock, and even dig up graves. Yet, there's almost nothing the locals are allowed to do about it. While the Komodo dragon was following its own unique path on its island home, a very different predator was evolving on the other side of the planet. Let's take a look at it now. The honey badger. Its appearance is deceptive. It looks a bit like a badger or a marten, kind of funny looking, and also pretty mean. But the honey badger isn't just another badger with a bad attitude. It belongs to a separate ancient branch of the mustelid family. The mustelid family first emerged in Asia during the Miocene. But the lineage that would eventually produce honey badgers split off very early, around 12 to 13 million years ago. So the honey badger isn't really a little badger. It's more like the black sheep from the sketchy side of the family everyone prefers to forget exists. That's because the honey badger's closest relatives aren't true badgers, but martens and wolverines from the Goulaninae subfamily. The relationship is still fairly distant, but you get the general idea of the crowd it comes from. And in the past, that crowd was much more terrifying because ancient honey badger relatives were even larger and more dangerous. Take Yamalivora, for example, giant animals that spread across Eurasia, Africa, and North America. They were much larger than modern honey badgers, and their powerful jaws were capable of crushing bones. Then there was Acorus, a long-legged giant ferret from Kenya, about the size of a large leopard. It lived in open habitats and, judging by the evidence, didn't just dig around in the ground, it actively chased down its prey. But the lineage of giants gradually died out, and its place was taken by mean little guys better suited to digging and living closer to the ground. Then around 2.5 million years ago, the modern honey badger appeared. Even though it had shrunk in size, the honey badger never fully accepted that it was now supposed to behave like a small animal. It still lives as though everyone should get out of its way and preferably bow while they're at it. If Komodo dragons cause trouble for people on the islands, the honey badger does roughly the same thing in its part of the world. The scale's different, but its methods are even more infuriating. Let's start with apiaries. Honey badgers love bee larvae and honey, and to them, a commercial beehive looks like a lunchbox. Once a honey badger gets its paws on one, it goes on a rampage. With its powerful claws, it tears the hives apart and practically shreds the beekeeper's budgets along with them. Things aren't much better when it comes to poultry. If a honey badger gets into a chicken coop, it may kill far more birds than it could possibly eat in one sitting. This is known as surplus killing. The animal doesn't simply take what it needs for food, it carries out a small-scale local massacre. And keeping one out is no easy task. An ordinary poultry farm isn't always much of an obstacle to a honey badger. It can rip through sturdy boards, dig underneath fences, and find its way into places where it was most definitely not invited. There have even been recorded cases of honey badgers attacking domestic sheep. I assume the sheep were looking at them disrespectfully. Sometimes, though, a honey badger doesn't just damage a farm, it also destroys its defenses. In Africa, farmers build special beehive fences to keep elephants away from their crops. Bees really can stop elephants. But to a honey badger, the fence itself becomes a target. It dismantles the structures to get at the honey and larvae, undoing all the work of the people who are only trying to protect their harvest. And as often happens with animals like this, the honey badger has also inspired its fair share of urban legends. For a long time, people believed that honey badgers in India visited freshly dug graves and excavated them. That story was later debunked, which is a shame. I'd have liked to see a Komodo dragon and a honey badger fighting in a cemetery under a full moon. But to be fair, honey badgers don't just cause trouble for people. The animals around them get their share too. Because a honey badger isn't the kind of creature that sits quietly in its burrow and tries not to bother anyone. It regularly picks fights with much larger animals, provokes them, steals their food, and wanders into places where it has no business being. No wonder it's earned a reputation as one of the biggest bullies on the African savanna. One of its nastiest tricks is stealing another animal's kill. This is known as kleptoparasitism. A honey badger may walk right up to a leopard, cheetah, or hyena and effectively demand that it hand over its meal. The problem is, arguing with a honey badger doesn't usually get you very far. It may be small, but it's ferocious, stubborn, and incredibly difficult to kill. So larger predators sometimes simply abandon their prey and walk away, because taking on a honey badger just isn't worth the trouble. And if a fight does break out, the honey badger has no interest in fighting fair. When facing a much stronger opponent, a lion, buffalo, or wildebeest, it may attack the groin and genitals. For a large animal, that means sudden shock, excruciating pain, and rapid blood loss. It seems to have a particular grudge against reptiles. Honey badgers hunt venomous snakes, and they don't wait for them to come out on their own. A honey badger may storm into the underground den of a large snake, a python or a cobra, for example, tear the place apart, and drag its owner out alive for dinner. And even someone else's home doesn't always look off limits to a honey badger. It isn't particularly fond of digging a permanent den of its own, so it often chooses the easier option, moving in on bat-eared foxes, meerkats, or porcupines and forcibly evicting them from their ready-made burrows. At least it doesn't eat them, so there's that. In short, the honey badger is an animal with absolutely no respect for personal boundaries, the rules of the food chain, fear, or common sense. But for now, let's leave the honey badgers to wreak havoc and return to the Komodo dragons. Which raises a perfectly reasonable question: why do the authorities put up with any of this in the first place? I mean, people live in these villages while a massive predator roams nearby doing whatever it wants. You'd think human lives should come first, and yet the government still protects the Komodo dragon. Because this isn't really about morality. Komodo dragons are endemic to the region. In the wild, they exist nowhere else on Earth except for a handful of small Indonesian islands. The species is listed as endangered, so to the authorities, it's no longer merely a dangerous animal, it's a rare national symbol that must be protected. Besides, hundreds of thousands of tourists fly in every year just to see these dragons. That brings in millions of dollars and provides jobs for a great many people. Komodo dragons are also an integral part of the island's ecosystem. They keep populations of deer, wild boar, and feral water buffalo under control. Simply removing a predator like that could throw everything else out of balance, and no one really knows what the consequences would be for the islands, so it's easier to make people adapt and put up with it. But if the Komodo dragons can't simply be removed, maybe the island needs an animal that'll make their lives difficult. Not a man with a rifle, but a creature that's quite literally the living definition of trouble. The honey badger fits that description almost too well. It's fearless, incredibly tough, has little regard for the word no, and already knows how to make life miserable for much larger predators. The only problem is finding enough honey badgers in the first place. Simply heading to Africa and trying to catch them wherever you happen to find them would be a terrible plan. Honey badgers have enormous home ranges up to 190 square miles. Their population density is low, and the animals themselves are rare. In other words, you could spend forever looking for them. Any such program would therefore need to begin in places where honey badgers can actually be found. The best spots would be Serengeti National Park in Tanzania and the Kalahari region of South Africa and Botswana. These areas have the highest confirmed population densities, as many as 10 honey badgers per 40 square miles. There is another option, the farming regions of South Africa. Honey badgers are already considered pests there because they raid beehives. Local beekeepers would probably be more than happy to hand over captured animals alive as long as someone took them away. In some areas, honey badgers are already actively persecuted. Small-scale livestock farmers kill them. Their body parts are used in traditional medicine, and their skins are sold at markets across southern Africa. So the locals already know how to deal with these animals. We just need to turn that experience from killing them into capturing them alive. And this is where the fun really begins. Because catching a honey badger isn't as simple as setting out an ordinary cage and collecting one very unhappy animal the next morning. You need heavy-duty steel live traps, either tubular or box-shaped and reinforced with steel rebar. Next to a honey badger, an ordinary chain-link cage looks less like a barrier and more like an invitation to escape. It can tear through the wires with its teeth and claws. The bait has to be substantial too. Small animal carcasses, bloody raw meat, or wild honeycomb, anything with a powerful smell that might attract the animal from miles away. But even if the honey badger walks into the trap, the job still isn't done. It can't be left locked inside for long. In a rage, it may grind down its claws against the metal or injure its face while trying to break free. That means every trap would need a satellite-triggered alert, and the team would have to arrive extremely quickly. By the time they got there, a tranquilizer dart would already need to be prepared, because the honey badger certainly wouldn't surrender without a fight. But catching a honey badger still isn't the hardest part. You also have to transport it. And this is where plastic, wood, and the hope that the animal will simply sit quietly are completely out of the question. A transport crate for a honey badger would need to look less like a pet carrier and more like a miniature safe. Remember how they transported Hannibal Lecter in the movie? That's roughly the level of security you'd need to move a honey badger. A welded crate made from heavy-duty sheet steel at least 1/8 of an inch thick. Any ventilation holes would have to be protected from the inside with fine steel mesh so the honey badger couldn't stick out its nose or a paw. The locks would need to be external and completely out of reach because a honey badger inside a crate wouldn't turn into a sad, obedient passenger. It would immediately start looking for a way out. These animals are remarkably intelligent and can figure out how to open doors and locks. They've even been known to leap through windows while trying to escape, so you can't just shut the crate and consider the problem solved. The honey badger would keep searching for weak points, biting, scratching, and doing what it always does when something tries to set boundaries. In short, the animals would have to be kept under deep sedation, medically induced sleep, for the entire 15-hour flight from Africa to Indonesia. Otherwise, transporting 100 honey badgers could quickly become the opening scene of an extremely absurd plane disaster. After arriving in Indonesia, the honey badgers would have to spend 30 days in mandatory quarantine. They would also need to be vaccinated against rabies and canine distemper, so they wouldn't introduce diseases to the local wildlife before they even encountered their first Komodo dragon. Only after that could the release begin. But even then, you couldn't simply dump the honey badgers on the shore and wait to see what happened. Temporary fenced enclosures would have to be built on Komodo, with the fencing buried at least 5 feet underground. Otherwise, the honey badgers would simply tunnel underneath it and bring the program to an early end. They would remain in these enclosures for a week while gradually being switched to local prey, rats, snakes, and small birds. Then they would be released at selected locations. Naturally at night, since honey badgers are primarily nocturnal. Komodo dragons, meanwhile, are daytime active, cold-blooded reptiles, so at night they're sluggish and usually remain inside their burrows. That would give the honey badgers a head start, time to explore the territory, find shelter, and begin settling in before their first combat encounter. The animals would have to be released individually rather than in groups, with each one placed 3 to 6 miles apart. Otherwise, the honey badgers would start fighting among themselves. And by morning, the Komodo dragons would discover a battlefield littered with bodies. All right, it's time to ask a big question. If a honey badger and a Komodo dragon actually crossed paths, what would happen? Would they really fight? At first glance, the answer seems obvious. A honey badger weighs no more than about 35 pounds. An adult Komodo dragon can be 6 to 8 times heavier. They're not even remotely in the same weight class. If the dragon managed to get a solid grip on the honey badger or pin it down with its full body weight, it could simply crush it. But the honey badger is famous precisely because nothing involving it is ever simple. Its skin is incredibly tough, about 1/4 of an inch thick, and hangs loosely around its body, almost like a bag. So when a predator grabs a honey badger, it can twist around inside its own skin and bite back. For a Komodo dragon, that's a serious problem. One moment you're starting to eat your lunch, and the next your lunch turns around and starts eating you. Honey badgers are also resistant to the venom of most snakes. Komodo dragon venom is a different matter, of course. These animals never evolved alongside each other, so there's no way to know for certain how it would affect a honey badger. But it's possible that the toxins which cause shock and prevent the blood from clotting properly would have less of an effect on it than on an ordinary mammal. Simply because the honey badger is, well, the honey badger. It's hardcore. And the honey badger has one more dirty trick up its sleeve, a powerful blast of foul-smelling fluid from its anal scent glands. To a human, it's merely disgusting. But to a reptile that relies heavily on its sense of smell, a stench that intense could be completely overwhelming. It would make for a pretty strange fight. On one side, you have a mammal with a fast metabolism that can keep thrashing, biting, twisting, and refusing to be held down for a long time. On the other, a cold-blooded reptile, but one that's enormous, heavy, and armed with a built-in saw. What I mean is that a Komodo dragon's teeth are serrated like a great white shark's and curve backward. They leave deep, ragged wounds. And beneath the skin of an adult dragon is something like a suit of chainmail made up of tiny, bony plates. It'd be extremely difficult for a honey badger to bite through that kind of armor, though I have no doubt it would try. So in a fair fight against a fully grown Komodo dragon, the honey badger would most likely lose. It might be an incredibly nasty opponent, but an adult dragon simply too large and too well protected. However, if the honey badger came across juvenile dragons, it would have a real chance. After all, it wouldn't have to charge straight at a massive prehistoric lizard in the prime of its life. It could focus on the next generation instead. Destroy the egg clutches the dragons bury underground and hunt their young. In the wild, young Komodo dragons spend most of their first few years in trees, because otherwise their own adult relatives would eat them. So when a juvenile weighing up to 22 to 33 pounds spots danger, it makes a run for the nearest large tree. And sure, a honey badger isn't a squirrel, and it can't gracefully leap from branch to branch, but it does have enormous claws up to 2 inches long, basically a built-in set of climbing spikes. And if there's prey waiting at the other end of the tree, you can be sure the honey badger will climb up after it, which means young Komodo dragons would have almost no chance. But once you set aside the entertaining fantasy of a war between mammals and reptiles, the picture becomes much less appealing. A honey badger program would almost certainly turn into a disaster of its own, and the first victims wouldn't be the dragons, but the people and the rest of the island's wildlife. Let's start with the most obvious problem. The honey badgers would begin killing one another. They're solitary animals with extremely strong territorial instincts, and Komodo is a small island, only about 150 square miles. That means the entire island would amount to the territory of 1 or at most 2 adult males. So instead of joining forces and marching off to war against the Komodo dragons, the imported honey badgers would first turn on each other. Before long, the island wouldn't be home to an army of 100 predators, but to a handful of the strongest, meanest, and most badly scarred survivors. And even that wouldn't be the biggest problem. Komodo dragons are dangerous, but at least they're predictable. They're active during the day, relatively slow and easy to spot. Local villages have long since learned how to live alongside them, building houses on tall stilts that a large lizard physically can't climb. A honey badger wouldn't care about the stilts. It would quickly realize that finding food in a village is much easier than digging through dragon nests. Why search for egg clutches, climb after young reptiles, or risk getting close to an adult Komodo dragon when there are chickens and goats nearby? Especially since honey badgers already have plenty of experience raiding farms, and they can slaughter far more livestock than any dragon. Protecting the villages from them would also be difficult. Honey badgers are strong, intelligent, and seemingly capable of just about anything. And if someone tried to defend their property, the animal probably wouldn't get scared and run away. It'd be more likely to charge into the fight first. So the villages that already live alongside Komodo dragons would suddenly have another problem, one far worse than the first. Not to mention what would happen to the island's other animals, such as ground-nesting birds and newborn deer. The honey badgers would eat them all. They could wipe out the dragon's food supply faster than they could wipe out the dragons themselves, and then hungry Komodo dragons would begin approaching human settlements more often because there would be less wild prey left in the surrounding area. Except there wouldn't be anything left to eat in the villages either. The honey badgers would have already eaten all the chickens and goats. But ignoring all those drawbacks, would the idea actually work? In the narrowest sense, yes. Honey badgers could destroy Komodo dragon eggs and kill juveniles. They really would become a serious problem for the dragons, but as a way of making the island safer, no. In fact, the only creatures that would probably feel safe would be the honey badgers themselves. You owe me a like. See you later.